when you observe yourself within, you see moving images.
Yes.
A world of images.
Yes.
Generally known as fantasies.
Fantasies.
Yet these fantasies are facts. You see, it is a fact that a man has such and such a fantasy. And it is such a tangible fact, for instance, that when a man has a certain fantasy, another man may lose his life.
Yes.
Or a bridge is built.
Yes.
These houses were all fantasies.
Yes.
Everything you do here, all of the houses, everything was fantasy to begin with. And fantasy has a proper reality. That is not to be forgotten. Fantasy is not nothing. It is, of course, not a tangible object, but it is a fact nevertheless. It is, say, a form of energy.
Yes.
Despite the fact we can't measure it.
Yes.
It is a manifestation of something.
Do you ever feel like the most important truths are found not in what you see, but in what you sense within? What if I told you that this is not just daydreaming, but a powerful type of intuition that reveals hidden truths about reality? In this video, we'll uncover the mysterious force called introverted intuition, the key to understanding your inner world and its connection to the collective unconscious. Introverted intuition, a term coined by Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst Carl Jung, is directed toward the inner object, which refers to the contents of the unconscious. The relationship of inner objects to consciousness is analogous to outer objects, though their reality is psychic, not physical. These inner objects, like thoughts and ideas, are just as real to the intuitive as physical objects are to others, even though they exist in the mind rather than in the external world. Just as external objects correspond only relatively to our perception of them, the inner objects appear in forms relative to their essence and the intuitive function's peculiar nature. Like sensation, intuition has a subjective factor, which is suppressed in the extraverted attitude, but is decisive for the introvert's intuition.
And so the psychical events are facts, are realities. And when you observe the stream of images within, you observe an aspect of the world.
Yes.
Of the world within. Because the psyche, if you understand it as a phenomenon that takes place in so-called living bodies, then it is a quality of matter. As our body consists of matter, we discovered that this matter has another aspect, namely a psychic aspect.
Although external objects may stimulate introverted intuition, it doesn't focus on external possibilities, but on what the object releases within. While introverted sensation perceives phenomena through the unconscious and is arrested there, introverted intuition suppresses this side of the subjective factor and perceives the image that caused the innovation. For example, when someone experiences psychogenic vertigo, dizziness that has psychological origins, sensation picks up on the physical details, like how intense the dizziness feels and how long it lasts. However, sensation doesn't dig into the deeper cause or meaning behind the experience. Intuition, on the other hand, looks past the surface symptoms and uncovers the unconscious image or psychological factor that's causing the vertigo. As Carl Jung described in Psychological Types, introverted intuition often perceives vivid, symbolic images that capture complex emotions or experiences. For example, it sees the image of a tottering man pierced through the heart by an arrow. This image fascinates the intuitive activity, symbolizing deep emotional insight. This kind of imagery is what introverted intuition focuses on, rather than just the external sensory details. In this case, intuition might uncover a symbolic image representing inner conflict or emotional turmoil, such as Jung's example of a man pierced by an arrow. This intuitive perception allows the individual to explore the deeper layers of consciousness and the hidden truths behind the physical sensation. It holds the vision, exploring every detail, observing how the picture changes, unfolds, and fades. In this way, introverted intuition perceives the background processes of consciousness with the same clarity as extroverted sensation registers external objects.
So, you see, the man who is going by the external world, by the influences of the external world, say society or perceptions, sense perceptions, thinks that he is more valid, because this is valid, this is real. And the man who goes by the subjective factor is not valid because subjective factor is nothing.
Yeah.
No, that man is just as well based because he is bases himself upon the world from within. So the introverted intuitive has in a way a very difficult life, although one of the most interesting lives.
For intuition, unconscious images have the dignity of things. To an intuitive person, images that come from the unconscious mind feel just as real and important as physical objects do to others. However, because intuition excludes the cooperation of sensation, it gains little or no knowledge of the physical effects produced by unconscious images. These images seem detached, as though existing independently. For instance, the introverted intuitive experiencing vertigo might not imagine that the image refers to himself. To a judging type, this seems almost inconceivable, yet it is a fact often encountered with intuitives.
So you see, if when the intuitive, the introverted intuitive would speak what he really perceives, then practically nobody would understand it. He would be misunderstood. And so they learn to keep things to themselves. And you hardly ever hear them talking of these things. That is a great disadvantage.
The indifference of the extroverted intuitive to external objects is mirrored by the introverted intuitive's indifference to inner objects. Just like extroverted intuitives may overlook what's happening inside themselves in favor of external experiences, introverted intuitives can become so focused on their inner world that they overlook what's happening around them.
And so he is quite right, even if he says, oh, there's nothing but my fantasy, And of course that is the introvert. And that the introvert is always afraid of the external world. He will tell you, when you ask him, he will be apologetic about it.
Yeah.
He will say, of course, yes, I know my fantasies. And he has always resentment. And that's the world in general, particularly America, is extroverted like hell. The introvert has no place. Because he doesn't know that he beholds the world from within.
Just as the extroverted intuitive constantly seeks new possibilities, heedless of human considerations, tearing down what has been built in the search for change, the introverted intuitive moves from image to image, chasing every possibility in the teeming unconscious, without establishing a connection to the external world or even to himself.
But it is difficult often to get into their confidence,
Yeah, because you say they're afraid that people will think
they're sick. The things that are interesting to them or are vital to them are utterly strange to the ordinary individual.
Yes.
One of the most difficult types is the intuitive introvert. The intuitive extrovert, you find among hunters, bankers, gamblers. Well, that is quite understandable.
Yeah.
But the introvert the introverted variety is more difficult because he has intuitions as to the subjective factor, namely the inner world.
Yes.
And of course, that is now very difficult to understand because what he sees are most uncommon things, and he doesn't like to talk of them.
Yes.
If he's not a fool. Because he would spoil his own game by telling what he sees, because people won't understand it.
Yes.
This disconnect can cause confusion and a sense of detachment from reality, as outer objects and events hold little relevance compared to the compelling world of inner images. To others, the introverted intuitive may appear aloof, absent-minded, or even lost in a world of fantasy, making their behavior seem strange or hard to understand. For both types, the world of appearances and inner images are aesthetic problems, matters of perception or sensation, not moral concerns. The introverted intuitive, therefore, has little awareness of his bodily existence or its effect on others. As Carl Jung insightfully expressed in Psychological Types, reality has no existence for him. He gives himself up to fruitless fantasies.
You see, when people make psychology as a psychologist what to do, well, the very first question is he extroverted or is he introverted?
Yeah.
He will look at entirely different things.
Yes.
Is he a sensation type? Is he an intuitive type? Is he thinking? Is he feeling?
Yes.
That because you see these things are complicated. That they are still more complicated because the introverted thinker, for instance, is compensated by extroverted feeling,
Yeah.
or by inferior extroverted, archaic extroverted feeling.
Yeah.
So an introverted thinker may be very crude in his feeling life.
The perception of unconscious images produced by the creative energy of life may seem fruitless in terms of immediate utility. Yet these images represent potential views of the world that may give life new possibilities. This function, strange to the outside world, is essential to the total psychic economy.
So my definition is, intuition is a perception by ways or means of the unconscious.
Yes.
That is as near as I can get. Now this is a very important function because when you live under primitive conditions, a lot of unpredictable things are likely to happen.
Yes.
And there you need your intuition because you cannot possibly tell by your perceptions, by your sense perceptions, what there is going to happen.
Introverted intuition apprehends images arising from the inherited foundations of the unconscious. These archetypes are like deep-rooted, inherited patterns that we can't fully experience directly. They represent the collective experiences of humanity, passed down through generations, shaping how we see the world. The concept of the noumenon, the thing in itself, as described by the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, refers to the reality that exists independently of perception. These archetypes focus the most intense experiences into clear forms, much like Kant's noumenon, of the image that intuition perceives and, in perceiving, creates. This resonates deeply with Jung's view of archetypes as the underlying reality perceived through intuition. As Immanuel Kant explains in his book Critique of Pure Reason, the noumenon, as the thing in itself, cannot be known directly, only inferred through the effects it has on our senses. The unconscious is not static, it constantly undergoes transformations connected to general events. Through its perception of these inner processes, introverted intuition can supply valuable data for understanding the world and even foresee possibilities or events that later come to pass. Its prophetic foresight stems from its relationship with archetypes, which represent the laws governing all experienceable things.
Ideal perception is that you have an accurate perception of the things as they are, without addition or corrections.
Yeah.
On the other side, the intuition does not look at the things as they are. That is prison, that is anathema to the intuition.
Yes.
It looks, ever so shortly at the things as they are, and makes off into an unconscious process, at the end of which we have seen something nobody else would have seen.
When introverted intuition gains ascendancy, it produces a peculiar type of person, the mystical dreamer or seer on one hand, the artist or crank on the other. The artist is the normal representative, shaping perception, while the crank is content with a visionary idea that shapes and determines him. The intensification of intuition often leads to an extraordinary aloofness from tangible reality, making the individual an enigma to those around him. If he is an artist, he reveals strange, far-off things in his art, shimmering in all colors, portentous and banal, beautiful and grotesque, sublime and whimsical. If not an artist, he may become a misunderstood genius or a wise simpleton. Although the intuitive type lacks moral engagement with perception, a slight differentiation of judgment can shift perception into the moral sphere. This creates a type concerned not just with perception, but with its meaning for himself and the world. He asks, what does this vision mean for me? What duty or task does it present? The purely intuitive type represses this question, focusing only on the know-how of perception. But the morally oriented intuitive reflects on the significance of his vision. He senses that it wants to participate in his life and feels compelled to transform his vision into reality. However, his reliance on vision often leads to one-sided efforts, making him symbolic in his approach to life, adapted to the inner meaning of events, but unadapted to present-day reality. His language becomes subjective, lacking the power of reason, leaving him, as Carl Jung with poetic grace reveals in Psychological Types, the voice of one crying in the wilderness. The introverted intuitive represses sensation, which colors his unconscious, often leading to physical symptoms or exaggerated sensitivity. As the intuitive focus grows more dominant, the repressed sensation emerges in an archaic, almost instinctual form, manifesting as hypersensitivity to physical sensations, hypochondria, or an exaggerated focus on bodily discomforts. These compensatory symptoms often seem disconnected from actual health problems, reflecting the unconscious tension between the intuitive and sensory worlds. The unconscious functions are in an archaic, animal state. Their symbolic appearances in dreams and fantasies usually represent the battle or coming encounter of two animals or monsters.
Now we must see what you dream, because the dream is a manifestation of the unconscious side. Now he never had heard of the unconscious side, so I must explain to him that he has an unconscious, and that the dream is a manifestation of it, and if we succeed in analyzing the dream, we might get an idea about that power that makes him think like that.
William Blake powerfully declares in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, "Without contraries is no progression. Attraction and repulsion, reason and energy, love and hate are necessary to human existence." These symbolic battles reflect the deeper struggles within the unconscious, where opposing forces shape the evolution of the psyche. These types are difficult to judge externally, as they offer little outward expression. Their main activity is directed inward, making them appear reserved, secretive, and uncertain. When something does surface, it's often an indirect manifestation of inferior unconscious functions, which excites prejudice from the environment. They are frequently misunderstood and undervalued by public opinion, failing to understand why. Their introverted intuition makes them hard to decipher for others, as their primary focus on inner images often results in fragmentary and elusive communication. Socially, they may appear reserved or detached, causing them to be misjudged as cold or indifferent. Their communication is fragmentary and episodic, demanding too much understanding from others. Their expression lacks warmth, often appearing brusque and repelling, although they are unaware of this. These types may seem fruitless from a rationalistic standpoint, but, from a higher perspective, they demonstrate that life's richness and complexity exist within, not just in the external world. Their lives, rather than their words, are educational experiences for those not blinded by intellectual trends. Their greatest fault, incommunicability, reveals one of civilization's greatest errors, the overvaluation of statements and methods. Just as a child learns more from the life of its parents than from their words, the same applies to teachers. Method alone cannot make an inferior man a good teacher. We mistakenly believe in the supremacy of method, yet true success comes from the life lived, not from external success. The irrational introverted types, lacking reason and ethics, demonstrate another possibility for humanity, one that our civilization sorely needs. In describing these types, it's essential to remember that pure types, where someone mainly uses just one mental function, rarely occur. Most people are a combination of dominant and auxiliary functions, meaning a blend of a person's main mental function and a supportive secondary one. While a primary function governs consciousness, a secondary, less differentiated function also plays a role, providing complementary support. For example, thinking pairs well with intuition as an auxiliary, or sensation, but not with feeling, which directly competes with thinking. The auxiliary function stays in a supportive role, helping the main function without taking over.
The introverted philosopher that is always carefully avoiding women will be married by his cook in the end.
Yeah. Now, then, in other words, then we can take your introvert, extrovert categories and, in a sense, go through describing a sensation, introvert type, sensation, extrovert type, thinking, introvert type, thinking, extrovert type, and so on. in each case, it stems from really not real categories, but simply, as you say, an approach, something to sort of help us study a model.
Well, it is just a sort of a skeleton to which you have to add the flesh, or say it is a country mapped out, by triangulation points, and that doesn't mean the country consists of triangulation points.
Yeah.
That is only in order to have an idea of the distances.
Yes.
And so it is a means to an end. It only makes sense, such a scheme, when you deal with practical cases.